great pleasures of doing so is of telling people about the mural behind us. I can only imagine what it must have been like. Maybe you'll tell us what it was like to have been commissioned to paint one of the most important medical milestones in history. How do you begin? How does one even begin to tackle that? So I'll be really interested to hear more about that. Warren and Lucia Prosperi, if you don't know them or know of them already, you're certain to have seen their work around the hospital. They've done more than 20 portraits? 35. More than 35.
Pushing
portraits. So you've certainly seen them in conference rooms and elsewhere around the hospital. Or if you haven't, you've likely seen at the Museum of Fine Arts in the Red Room. It's a kind of sort of a meta piece of sort of their depiction of the gallery itself. So they've done all kinds of things, portraiture, murals, landscapes, and everything. And so with that, I will turn it over to Warren and Lucia.
I want to start with just, this was a labor of love. That when Warren had surgery, right before we actually started, he woke up and out of anesthesia, he started talking about the design of the mural. And then my mother joked at that same moment, how much are you paying the hospital so you can do this? So this is where we started in terms of this incredible honor of being asked to do this.
And what Sarah said is the real point. You know, what happened here. Wait, you really get an echo. Trying to hear where you're supposed to be, right? This is where the surgeons were supposed to stand and speak to the. It really works, doesn't it? No need of mic standing here. It's exactly that. How do you get a hold of it? So John Herman, who I'm sure you all know, had renovated this place to try to, doll it up and bring it back to its former glory, and it had gone down pretty considerably. And what was supposed to set it alive was a historically accurate rendition of the very famous and important event that went on here. So what Sarah said is exactly right. So now you're assigned the job of clearing away all the historical flack and finding out what it really looked like and who was actually there and where were they standing and how did the operation proceed. So you can see how it took 2 years before it was easy. We were hard at a lot of research for that period, but we were helped tremendously by a book by Richard Wolff, who was the head of Countway at the time, who had, looking at the other painting of the first operation under Ether, the Hinckley, what determined that there was an awful lot of historical inaccuracy. That people were presented there, which you may have all seen it at the Countway Library, they have it hanging at the Countway now. And that people were represented who weren't there on that day, and none of the positioning. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Hinckley, in order to get the viewpoint of the Hinckley, you have to lose that wall first. The wall's got to go. And you've got a vision for about 10 feet that way. And the chair was over here. Right? So the whole physical organization of that painting was meant as a commemorative multiple portrait. It was not meant as an accurate representation of the history. And as a commemorative portrait, it's interesting. It's got that, the nice stuff in the front there. But what John wanted was something that would have been what you would have seen if you were here. So
we used to say to ourselves, if you had been Cartier-Bresson, the great photographer, where would he have stood if he were trying to capture what that moment was really about?
I don't know that you guys are familiar with his work, but he seemed to be able to weasel himself into the strangest places and get these remarkable things. There's a famous photograph of his where people are feeding the starving folks of India off of a truck, and for some reason he's in back of the guy who's dishing out the food, looking down on all the faces that are reaching up to the. So he had this knack for finding that viewpoint that was the most important and telling viewpoint. But before you could find that viewpoint, you had to know what happened here. And now what happened here and the story of Morton and all that sort of stuff. When we try to tell that story, we'll fill the hour with that story, and we won't go on to anything else.
Actually, if we're going to tell that story, we're going to give it over to Warren.
We have Warren and John and I.
We're just keeping it to the making of the mural.
Right. So this is all about when that problem was handed to us, what we had to determine and how we had to go about doing the project. So the first...
Well, I just wanted to add, so Richard Wolff gave us the list of people who were actually there that day.
Which I think probably carved about a year off of this.
It really did. And when we would talk to other people around the country, what was so fascinating is the people who felt that others had really introduced ether were as alive and angry about it today as they probably were 150 years ago.
Sorry, select scholastics. Certain scholastics were still working this thing out.
But from an artistic point of view, I remember getting off the phone with somebody at the University of Chicago Wood Library and turning to Warren and saying, we can't solve this. All we have to figure out is what happened that day at that moment. That's our
And the question was, what moment? So we pulled, what is right? So here was a moment where modern surgery was born. Anesthesia as a specialty was born, and modern surgery was born by virtue of that, right? So what would be the most salient moment? So here, this is something we do in portraiture all the time.
This is one of my favorite parts of the whole discussion when we talk about this. When we make a contemporary portrait, we meet with the person. We try to figure out what is the most telling moment of his life, his character, her life, her character in his work.
Gestures, we go about the gestures that are telling of the person. We worked with Jay Harris. We painted Jay Harris, Red Arm over at Brigham, and he always keeps a hand in one of his coat pockets like this, and sometimes two.
Yeah.
So when he's talking, he's pivoting like this with his, and when he's playing, that's had to be the, if we didn't put that in the piece, we would have missed the whole deal. A lot of the way portraits fall down is that the person is shoved into a formal format. They stand or pose according to some convention. Their personality, especially their gesture, but often their expression, is subtracted almost deliberately.
So we actually have developed a methodology that we go through in order to try to dig this out. It's a little bit like detective work. And when we did the Jocelyn Clinic murals, which preceded the Ether Dome mural, we realized our methodology for making portraits could time travel. That if you could research who was there and what the critical moment was, you could stage the whole thing, use models, get the animation, then morph the historic figures, the likenesses on the contemporary models, and you would have a real moment. So that was our insight that allowed us to begin.
And the basic framework of the basic general intellectual guide for the approach. So the question was, what moment? So we had a lot of the guys from the general, a lot of the chairs from the general, came down to the studio, and we had a meeting. So what moment are we going to choose here? What was the most important moment? What we said we wanted to see is the moment, it was a small vascular tumor, they call it. Now, a couple of people said it wasn't a vascular tumor.
No, when you say months, you can stay here a month.
That's right, you stay here a month. In this building, probably for now, right here for a month, with this wound open so that the, in quotes, cleansing pus could do its job, right? So I can see some nurse really siphoning off this stuff.
Well, we throw this theory in interception. This is the beginning.
Exactly. And anybody wants to throw, I would love having you throw stuff in. Keep doing it. We have so much expertise here that it's...
No, I was going to say, actually, when we were asked to give this talk about 10 days ago, I said as long as it can be a conversation of what we did, as opposed to a formal PowerPoint presentation, we are all set, because to talk about this is to talk about something that is so important to us. So please, if you have questions, you want to join.
Yeah, John, pop in anytime. So everybody came over, and there was a big discussion about whether you should do blood or no blood. No blood is, you know, I had a hard time getting anything from these guys about how much blood it would be. I forget what surgeon it was I talked to, but I said, you know, how much blood do you think it would be there? He says, I don't know, my patients don't bleed. And then one would say X amount, and the other one would say another completely different thing. So obviously surgery had changed a lot from the moment where you were worried about actual bleeding. But we finally worked all this out, and everyone agreed that the moment in which he was suturing off the tumor in the neck, pulling the suture tight around the strangulating thing, was probably the most invasive moment, was probably the moment if the anesthesia was going to fail, it was going to fail at that moment.
That would be the tell.
Right. That the incision was, you know, scalpels are sharp, might not have felt it as much, but you know, goofing around in there and then pulling it out and suturing it off, that would probably be the moment when everybody was craning in to see whether the guy was going to squawk or not, right? And this is the deal. This is the big moment. So now we at least had our moment. So how do you know where, first off, where do you want to view it from? Well, what would have been the best vantage point? Well, you can't get to where the best vantage point was until you've settled where everyone was standing. If you want to show their faces and whatnot, you have to know where they're all standing before you can pick the vantage point. Right?
Now, one of the props we had is this chair. This is not just for Warren to sit on.
This is the magic chair which answered all our
It
questions.
still existed, and we knew the location because of the light.
Right.
So we knew this was where the surgery had taken place.
And this is the way they used to do it. So quickly, the room was different then.
Before electricity.
Yes.
So you only
Thank you.
have candles. God forbid you have candles in ether. Nevertheless, you
Yeah.
have and ether, and so.
Could you speak loud, please?
We can't hear what they're saying. What he said was they had candles, and they had candles with ether, God forbid. You know, the combination of the two. So there was no electricity.
Yeah, proof. So,
So the timing of the operation was at 10 o'clock. We knew that.
yes, during this time, where Bullfinch had designed this place, even with the lights off, to be luminous enough to do an operation in this spot, with the reflection from the dome. There was another window there, because that was the back end of the building. They closed this off and they put the building behind. So you had another big source of light there. But the principal light source is as you see it right now. And even if you turn we have the lights on, if you turn the lights off,
And we're 2 hours later, roughly.
substantially the same amount of light, we just have a small amount of augmented warm light.
Was
But you
that
can
those
see-
shades?
Those shades were there, yes.
So
They were there,
that's-
and the open cupola. The cupola makes a difference as well. You guys, maybe a one-stop drop there. Get a little more ambient light as it bounces off. It's actually rather remarkable how engineered for the right amount of light in this spot.
What we had to do,
John Herman, those were all painted black during the Second World War. They
Which was?
expected bombing the
windows and.
Oh, the windows up top, they're painted black.
Painted black. The copper.
And the copper is painted black, right.
And thanks to John, it was all cleaned up.
Cleaned up.
In terms of the 50th, we got the house rebuilt.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
it's interesting because the operation was at 10 o'clock, but we needed, and we'll get into this in a minute, but we needed to have the lighting stay the same for the entire day of our photo shoot because it had so many component parts and decisions that had to be made.
So we had big flashes that flash up into the dome and created down light similar to the light created by the ambient light here. So as we went on during the day, we can maintain that light. But I want to stay on the line of decisions here. So we now have the moment, right? We had to know where everyone.
We had our list of people.
Yes, we had our list of people. We'd gone to the countway and we'd seen, we got all the daguerreotypes of how they look. Now we know how they look and we know who was there, but we didn't know where they were standing. So here the magic chair does its work. We're going to turn the lights on this one. to the painting. So, the first step was to find out where the tumor was, because where the surgical field was would dictate where the surgeon would stand. Right? So it was you could follow it. We knew he was seated here. This is where, we knew this was the chair. We knew that they did this here. I was about to say, in the old days, you entered here, there was a divider, movable but semi-permanent divider that went to here. There was a catch door here. All the instruments were in cases in the back. There was another divider, see, from here that went back with another catch door. That was pre-op. This was op, and that was post-op right there, right, as they would put them through. And all the instruments in the back. All the photographs show this cable back here. That was for the photographer who was going to shoot from that row. The surgeries happened here where you could speak and everyone could see and gather tight around.
If you've never stood down here, you should, and you probably all have, but if you haven't, your voice is completely different than if you're on the other, if you step outside.
Really bounces off the
It was
dome.
really designed so the surgeon and
Could
people
speak from here and all the rest.
We realized we didn't need microphones because of the design.
Yeah. So the tumor was on the right side. Right? So if we placed him here, the surgeon has to be here. Right? There was a question, by the way, what was the handedness of the surgeon? If he was left-handed, he would have stood in a different place than if it was right-handed, right? Okay, so how do you settle that issue? And is that something you're going to have to blow off? We were thinking about it, but then we went over to the fog with Patty Austin and Ellie Hackett, and we went to the fog and we pulled out all the daguerreotypes. And we were looking around for some evidence, and Patty found, you will see it in the reproduction down on the first floor, but Patty found that Warren, in those reenactments, which happened much after the actual operation, Warren had his glasses off, and they were in his hand, and they were resting on the surgical table, and he had them in his right hand. So, it's not exactly hard evidence, but most people take their glasses off with how they're handed. So we said we had one small bit of evidence that he was right-handed. We could then put him on this side of the patient so that he could reach the tumor if the head was pushed in the right direction. So, where would Morton have had to have been? Well, obviously he had least access to the head. If the head was pushed this way, he would have to be on this spot, regards the angle of the head. He had to share the head for the first time ever with the surgeon, right? Both of them needed access, and he didn't know how often he was going to have to administer. So we determined him. Now, we have patient, surgeon, and anesthesiologist, the first, and
Known at this point as an etherizer.
And I don't
etherizer.
know if you heard that, etherizing, known as an etherizer.
We were etherizers first, and then another decade we became anesthesiologists.
Yeah.
Borrowed the word and used it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Dalton, who is the man who is holding the head of the patient here, whose name is Adam. Dalton became the first physiologist in the country and was the chief etherizer,
Yes.
right, at Mass General for quite a while. So we knew where Dalton would be standing. We know Dalton was there, and we knew they didn't know whether it would work. So if the guy is going to jump up into the scalpel, so to speak,
And they had that a year earlier. They had a paramedical student, they used nitrous oxide on and failed, and it was bah humbug, what a
Right.
scoundrel.
Yeah, Horace Wells came from Hartford to do the test, and it didn't work.
Right.
He was glued, his whole career tanked out.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He was, no.
So they were ready for this.
They were ready, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And they knew so they bound arms and legs. What if it doesn't work, right? So we have to have someone to hold his head against so we knew where that person was, all right? So now many of the people are falling into place. As for the rest, up in the gallery, There are only two
I
persons.
just want to add one thing. Augustus Gould, the man behind Morton, had worked on the design of the inhaler. So we assumed
The
he...
night before.
Yeah.
The night before.
Exactly. So we assumed that he would also be hovering close by.
Very close by, because when they came up, when Morton ran up the steps late, much to the chagrin of the surgeon who gave him what for, yeah, your patient is ready, you know. They were worried about the valves in the inhaler working. So we figured that Gould, being the designer and maker of, he actually made the inhaler, would have to be very proximate, or would want to be very proximate to the inhaler in case it would dysfunction, right? So that meant to us that we should put him right over the shoulder of Morton, right? Now, Bigelow had been very, very important in a way that the historical record does not really indicate. Bigelow was the man who really, really wanted anesthesia. He had written a big paper about it. He knew that it was something that had to come.
And he knew they were doing it on the hill for dental work.
Yes, and then, well, he heard, I don't know whether you remember this, but he saw an advertisement from Morton, who was a dentist, who was pulling teeth for the Back Bay ladies. He yank out all their teeth and put in porcelain dentures, right? They submitted to this torture, put in porcelain dentures to give them their smile back, you know, people lost their teeth, and a lot. And they were willing to have all their teeth pulled out without anesthesia, but it was obviously going to behoove his practice if he could find a painless way to do so. The whole history about that is known, and we don't want to get into it. We're going to stay with the painting.
Well, we do want to get into it, but that would take hours.
Yeah, that would take. So Bigelow saw an advertisement by Morton in the newspaper that Morton used to run this advertisement where he would have like a carny thing, where he would have a weight attached to his porcelain denture, and say, you can lift this weight with my dentures, the suction. It was held in by suction the first time. And they had someone lifting a weight with his denture without the denture falling out. Right? So it was like Barnum and Bailey was selling his denture. and so this advertisement said, for the first time, painless tooth extraction, right? And Bigelow reads it, goes down a hill. It was just down where the old State House was, in that vicinity. He goes down the hill and knocks on his door and says, show me this stuff. And for a month, I paraphrase, obviously, and for a month, they pulled teeth together. And he got a really good sense of how it was done, what to expect. Then he came up and convinced John Collins Warren to let it be tried in a minor operation here. So, Bigelow and Morton were tight for that whole month. Where would Bigelow stand? And we have placed him right there. In a sense, he was co-etherizer at this event. They had been doing that for a long time. And once, I'll be giving a little presentation here, and a relative of Bigelow said to me, he said, oh, by the way, we Bigelows have very bad teeth. And in fact, Henry had his teeth pulled by Morton. It's in the family. And so Bigelow not only watched and helped etherize others, he was etherized and had so he knew what it was like from the other side. Before he brought it up here, he was very cautious that he didn't want this to fail like it had been with Wells. So Bigelow really played an important role. He had to be that tight. We just couldn't imagine that he would be up in the gallery. He would be down and on the floor. We know he was there, be on the floor, he'd be right next to it. Speculation? Yes.
Well, this is the detective work of doing historic pieces. You have these little bits and pieces that you work with, that you hope guide you to the facts, so you can build the image from the facts, so the painting will have that authenticity that facts give, and a beautiful design hopefully amplifies. Exactly. When we do a contemporary portrait, all of that's done for us because the person's there, the environment's there, we get to talk to the person. So you're trying to you're doing the same thing, but you have to do with different
Reach into the
resources,
dark and
different
find out all the
resources.
facts and pull them out of the dark. So,
And let me just add this, we had the advantage too of, Warren Zapol, we had John Herman, we had a few more, Ellie Hackett, Patty Austin. We had
Glenn
group-
Lamorale, the vascular surgeon, that helped us.
we had a group of people. Hello there. Oh, there's Glenn.
Hey, Glenn!
Yeah, we had a wonderful group, and we'll get a little bit more specific to that too, because Glenn has made a wonderful contribution. And you listen, and you do that with contemporary portraits, you do it with the story. You get a collaborative focusing group going to see what happened, what really made a difference.
So back to our position. So this is a piece, this is the fellow Glenn post for. His name was Hayward. I saw him, he had a big Italian nose. I don't know how Hayward got big
We like to
Italian
use
nose.
the
Beautiful, large, I like Glenn. And we hunted around. Hey, Patty! So what we assumed, we found out as we dug around, that there would be someone in assistance to the surgeon to take care of mopping up blood, because unlike contemporary patients, they do bleed in. That some mopping up, cleaning, trying to keep the surgical field clean enough so that the surgeon could see what he was doing. Well, where would he have to be? He'd obviously have to be close by enough to reach the patient and stay out of the way. And here's something that Glenn gave us, which was so cool.
This is, before you do that, this is a really good point to talk about the models.
No, let me finish that and then we'll go back. So, when we were shooting, I saw this hand gesture behind the back, like this. That isn't the typical hand gesture. You wouldn't think, oh, I'll pose somebody with their hand gripped behind their back, right? And I went over to Glenn during the process, and I said, Glenn, it's unusual. Why are you having your hand back there like that? He said, well, you wouldn't want to bump the surgeon's elbow, would I? Right? So we had this overqualified models for the day who were able to guide us step by step past things that we would have missed easily. So he found himself in that much proximity and knew that he had to pull this. So the same way with Bob Martusa, who's playing Bigelow in this situation, he's holding his lapels like this as he stands here. And I said, look, I don't want Abraham Lincoln. This is, it looked too antique or something like that. And he said, and again, the same thing. Well, I have to put my hands somewhere. I either have to put them back here, or I have to hold them up in here. I have to do something to keep them out of the way. This keeps my coat out of the way at the same time. Again, overqualified models. So
Many of you know what we did, but I just want to back it up for those who don't. Is we, from the pool of people at MGH, Patty Austin and Ellie Hackett, helped us find the people who look like the historic figures.
now this is an important point for us. When you got the daguerreotypes, they're frontal, they're stiff, you have the physical likeness, but you don't know what, you might or might not be aware that a person's facing the front, from 3/4, from profile, present different aspects. It's a little hard to calculate or extrapolate what they would look like from different angles. So if you're a surgeon like this, well, what does John Collins Warren look like in that position, right? We have the daguerreotype shows you what he looks like this way, but what does he look like that? So if you have a double, I could have gone to central casting, but if you have a double that is close enough, then you can get an approximate idea of what the head would look like there. Then you can give them all plastic surgery and make them conform to the basic information in the daguerreotype. Well, the better match your model is, less surgery is necessary, so to speak, to adapt it, and the more likely it is to look like your compatriot in the hospital is in the role. In fact, everyone here is the people from 1846, but they bear sufficient enough resemblance to the models that anyone here sees the models, not the 1846 people. So if any of you are ever explaining, these are the historically accurate, historical figured portraits, right? They are not depictions of the people here in the hospital. It just so happens Phil Kessler is almost a dead ringer for John Collins Warren, so it's unavoidable to...
And we were lucky because Emerson college, we have a good friend who was vice president at the time, and said, I think that there's some students and some people in the theater who can help you with getting the correct clothing and so forth. So we worked with Emerson on that, another level to the collaboration.
Yes, and they supplied it all for the day. It was a great day.
So,
Mutton chops on everybody and all the rest.
So
It was great.
what we finally did is we took a Sunday and we asked doctors, and anyone, all of you here will appreciate this, from 9 to 4, to give
On
the
Sunday, from 9 o'clock in the morning to
day
4 in the afternoon.
over. I got a zillion emails saying, are you serious? 9 to 4. I said, trust me, this is what we need in order to work out the image of what we're trying to do. And to our great delight, it really did work. It was an amazing day.
Actually, yeah, it was quite it set a bomb off here. They were taking out the brain trust of MGH because a lot of the chairs were models and all the rest.
But what we did do that day is Warren had figured out where Cartier-Bresson stood.
Yeah, we'll get to that. So now, once we know where everyone is, by the way, the only other person we haven't discussed, in the two people we haven't discussed on the inside, this is Townsend, who had the reputation of being at every surgery ever performed. He was just regular. He was always on the floor. He was always standing nearby. So Townsend would have had to have been this side of the area, right? And this was, played by John Herman, Eben Frost. Eben Frost was the first man to answer the ad by Morton to have his tooth pulled under anesthesia. And Morton brought him along to tell the patient it's going to work out all right, it's going to be fine, I've had it done, etc. So we supposed that he was talking with Abbott, who was the patient, and at the time of the operation was pushed to the back, that he probably would not, because of the physical organization of this place, leave the operating area. It's hard to leave the operating area. I mentioned the barriers that go back from here. This was open. These openings were not there. This was open. You came in here, filed in, and filled up, and then when it was over, you filed out an opening here. On either side, outside the two barriers. Right? So
remember, nobody wanted surgery. And before Ether, we only did 2 operations a month in this place.
that's right.
Did
Two
you hear that?
operating.
Nobody wanted surgery.
Two operations a month. They did an operation.
People
Yeah, exactly.
jump out of windows.
Yeah. I mean, so.
And along that, I was hoping Andy Warshall would come, because I know he might have one. He's probably in radio or whatever. But he told us a story, which I think is it's so dramatic, about an operation by Liston, the famous surgeon, where there was 300% mortality rate, which was a very good way to cue up the thing, right? So the guy was having his leg amputated. In those days, they had took a long scalpel and would cut in one big swoop to the bone, then saw the bone. And this guy, Liston, was able to do that in 30 seconds. And of course, the faster you did it, the better it was. This is pretty gruesome stuff. So on this day, accidents happen all the time. On this day, when he made the cut, the man who was holding the leg still lost his fingertips in the cut. And a spurt of blood came up and struck the lapel of a spectator who thought he had been stabbed, died of heart attack. The patient died of sepsis, and the assistant died of sepsis. So 300%. That's why this was a very important day. That's like a simple, clear way to describe why this was a very important event.
And what we did, and what Morton did, was to give time.
That's it.
What changed surgery was going from 30 seconds to 10 minutes to
Right.
get the leaders to begin to design operations. to
Warren, I was just,
change things.
I was going to say, when we were waiting, a woman came in and she had just gone through 36 hours of brain surgery.
Yeah.
And we were just talking, and I thought, boy,
Thank you, Dr. Moore.
There that is. And she said that. I mean, she just exactly.
So now, that's all the crew. That's all the crew that were on the floor. We know there were 2 there were mostly a small group of students up in the gallery, but there were two people who were known to us. One is Henry Bigelow's dad, Henry Sr., and this guy named Wellington, William Wellington, I think it was. Anyway, Wellington happened to be studying to be a doctor. It took 2 years then. And he was the grade school teacher of Morton, who happened to be here. Morton shows up for this big day, and he sees his grade school teacher here, right? And they go, wow. And he was in the gallery, so we knew he was in the gallery, and Henry Sr. was in the gallery, the rest were students. Okay? So now we knew where they were is given to us by the arrangement of the seats. Where the surgeon was, where all the attendants were given to us by the position of the surgical field, by extrapolation. So where do you want to stand? Where would Cartier-Bresson have gone to get the best viewpoint? And that's where this gentleman is. Because if that is all arranged, it's where you see all the heads of the people in the surgery, and many of the people from any other situation, you see the backs of the head. You go from here, you would see the back of the head of the surgeon, back of the head of the anesthesiologist, right? From that side, you can see everything. That is the best seat in the house, right? Where you are. So that was where the camera went. So now we had our setup. It took us 2 years to get there.
Yeah, it was amazingly detailed. And on the day of the shoot, we had our lights, we had our professional lighters who came in and made sure we could do it all day long, so we could work out the poses. And we did a lot of run-throughs as to what it would have looked like. And at one point when Glenn had this and Bob Martuzza had that, and Warren said, I'm not going to look, because I'm the one that is behind the camera catching it. And so we had him turn away so he wouldn't be correcting the image. Because those, and this is really true of the contemporary portrait, those accidents give you life and make you buy it and accept it as a viewer as a real moment. I want to use an example that I love, which is our portrait of Priscilla White for the Jocelyn Clinic. It's how we met Pat Donahoe. Ellie Hackett said she's the same body double as Priscilla White.
We stuck Priscilla White's head on Patty's model.
And just if you don't know who Priscilla White is, she figured out that if you deliver a diabetic woman's baby, I think it's the 35th week or 30, a couple weeks earlier, the baby doesn't have diabetes. But she wasn't allowed to do this at any Harvard-affiliated hospital.
Only men could do it.
Only men. So we have our image, and you can see it if you're over in that area, the lower level of the Jocelyn Clinic, of Priscilla White checking out her patient. We were at the
She'd take them in her own car and bring them over to the Faulkner, where she was allowed to deliver babies at
her own Bentley.
her own Bentley. I think it was a very fancy car she had.
So our model budget was a little smaller in those days, and I was the pregnant woman with the basketball underneath me and the coat, and Pat came on one of the coldest winter days you could imagine. We'd never really met.
To the auto museum out in Brookline, so we could get an old antique.
Here's the piece that says it all. When she was checking us out, she had me put my hand on her arm. And if you see that piece,
Pat said, she'd be holding on to me.
Yeah.
In this situation, we're taking her out of the hospital and we're going, she'd be holding on to me. And so we should reach that grade. Again, overqualified models, always the best thing.
But that tenderness is the key of that whole piece. And it reveals who Priscilla White is and what she did. And Pat, our overqualified model who we never met, who made time for us to do this, really taught us how important it is to have models who are engaged with whatever it is we're trying to understand.
And because the natural gestures will fall out.
And Glenn, I mean, it's so much fun to have the people who were there that day, because Glenn was essential. I mean, that's a pivotal piece. Even the tension in his hand, you know, it's
tightness.
The tightness in his hand, is this going to work? And all those subtle signals that are put into the piece is what day was like.
Then the rest, after this all settled, the material was coming to the studio, we had folks change up. We'd have everybody shuffle positions in the back so that the gestures wouldn't lock up into the same gesture at a time. We'd shoot, so I had a selection of many gestures of leaning in. My instruction was, now, if you can't, I want you to all, if you can't see the surgical field, you're not in the right spot. Crane, do what you have to do. So that's what you would do at that time. Make sure that you have to see. So then you'd shuffle the positions of everybody and say, now everybody else do it. Now I have a lot. Even down here, we would have Phil start and stop, and then all the bossy surgeons would tell me he was doing it wrong, and then he would come back because he was this stroke fella. The surgeon would say, no, you can't.
And then David Silverman.
Oh, that's another guy. So the patient, a very smart guy, he said, well, I was all tied up, but I had one thing I could do, is I could move my hands. So every time we would shoot, he'd put his hands in a different position like this.
So we had this wonderful selection of what was most telling, again, what the tell is of his situation.
Right. Those were synthesized into a design, and we see the results. We brought the frame and the blank canvas up, hung them on the wall, the blank canvas framed up. I got all my gear in that closet, and for a year I painted here on site. To people using these, they watched it appear over the course of about a year.
Best studio Warren's ever had.
Yes, it's really a fine studio. It's really got great light, and so that's a little tale of how we painted. How we do? Oh, pretty good. How about that? Anything you guys might know?
Anyone who was there, I mean, is there anything you want to add that gives a picture of what that...
Patty, you remember, Patty in Austin's way up in the top here.
Hello.
Patty, you remember fetching models? You might have a story about fetching models. Did you went and Ellie went around and finding models. That was it.
That's what's so interesting. I remember that we got...
Yeah, it's interesting, like when the plastic surgeons change something, they only change 1/8 of an inch, or a 1/4 of an inch is a huge change, right? And then you say, look at somebody and say, that doesn't look like him at all, right? And so when you're thinking about, this one's nose is a little long, or this one's forehead's a little wider, or something along that line, it's a small change if your closer your model is to the original. And we have a pool of, what, 30,000 people here, right?
I don't know.
Is it, how many employees are there? 30,000? Something in that area? So,
Close enough.
close enough, yeah, thousands, tens of thousands. So we had a big enough pool that we could find something like doubles. If I had to go to central casting, we would really been screwed, I think. That would have been very hard. We really had quite
I don't think, and I don't think we ever lost sight of the fact as to where we were and what this moment is. It just really shaped the whole intention of what we were trying to do. And
Here's one last little bit. So there's a woman named Julie Fenster, who was American Heritage, who wrote a book called Ether Day. And she had researched this moment extensively. And she had worked up a verbal description of the moment in the first of her book. She was invited here, and Lucia and I were invited here, we were going to meet each other. And I was worried, oh my gosh, she's done 2 years. Is she going to come up with something radically different than what we saw? I was worried. Not too worried, because we've done a lot of, good research, but still, you got 2 people working on it very hard, trying to figure it out. And then she came in, and we had a lovely room, we had a nice exchange, and she said, I was so worried that I was going to see an image which was so far away from what my research had given me, but instead, that's exactly how I saw it in my mind after I'd done all the... So that was a nice, triangulation of evidence and work.
She was absolutely right.
yeah,
And Wolf wasn't. And Wolf hated Morton, so you have these blood hate
yes,
going
yeah,
on here
Yeah.
50 years later.
yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Hater, people who love him. but
Yeah, I know.
She loved him.
Yeah.
Yeah, she really loved Warren.
I always felt with Morton that had it failed that day, there would have been no one claiming credit. He is the one that took it on both sides.
He's the one who went out on the limb.
He showed the world.
Yeah, he won. And 6 months, I don't know if you guys know this, but in 6 months it was all over the world. It was in Singapore 6 months later. In 1846,
Yeah.
everywhere in 6 months. 2 weeks later, Liston, the famous 300% guy, said, "Whoa, thank God." And he picked it up right away. He killed enough bystanders that he was very interested in slowing it down. Good stuff. You know, he picked it up just like that, and so it was at Edinburgh 2 weeks later. And
I have actually two statements that I'm talking about for brief. So I was actually an intern or a resident when you guys were painting this. I had no clue what was going on except that there was this painting that would appear at the end of each grand rounds. They'd pull up the screen and there'd be a little bit more of the painting, and it was intensely exciting to watch it take place. This is before the renovation, there were actually bicycle seats, old leather bicycle seats up there that the interns would get stuck on. They were on poles. And if you fell asleep in the grand rounds, you would hit the floor with a big crash. So that was the excitement of seeing what was going to be under the screen when it came up. Often saved me from falling asleep. But the second thing that was very exciting was there was a painting that used to be there that it was an old-fashioned painting, but to me it just looked like Glen Moralia. I don't know if you thought that, but and they took it down as part of the renovation. I was like, oh no, that's awful. And then when this was finally finished, there he appeared again.
But it was a very hard time to find a picture of Haywood. But when we found Haywood, Glen is very close to what Haywood looked like. So it was very fortuitous to have a model that close. A little hair where he doesn't have it, and things like that.
So I'll ask my question too, because you haven't talked at all about some of the design elements of the painting. And one of the things that strikes me is the space that's on the left. I mean, you would imagine that it would be crowded, there would be people there, and clearly you did that for a reason that anyway, you can tell us about why.
Which space aisles?
Well, for instance, the person that's in the second row all the way to the left, why isn't there someone standing to the left of him? Yeah.
One more.
And what's the question? Why are we not?
Why is it not more crowded? Yeah, so there's a whole strip of unclaimed seats up there. So I
Yes,
guess
there
probably that's the
was.
design.
We did that research, and there
Oh.
was maybe, I think it was something like 15 people. It was
November
very,
7th was the big day.
yeah, November 7th, there was 300 people.
I see.
This place was stuffed, and they went down the stairs and out in front of Bigelow. The news had spread everywhere. By the way, when they took the leg off of that woman, that was the Capitol. And after they'd done this little thing, the Capitol thing came 2 weeks later. They took her leg off, and they held it up and showed it. See what we've done, and showed it to her. This was theater in this place, and the whole place goes, oh, I didn't feel the thing. It's like it was a game show, surgery, the game show. And so it was really something. But that day there was almost no one here. There was 10 people. They didn't want it to flop and have a bad thing. So just a few insiders knew that was going to happen. And yes.
I have a question about the position of the Apollo statue.
Yes.
I saw a picture down in the basement that it used to reside up here.
Not up there, ever, but it moved around mysteriously. You go through all the daguerreotypes, and 1 minute it's here, the next minute it's there. Moving it does not look like an easy job, but they moved that baby over and over and over again. It was here, I saw a daguerreotype there, there's one over here. So I said, in the course of the changing, this is as reasonable a position as any, so I settled it because it was such a nice feature from that viewpoint. So I said it could have been there as easily as it could have been anywhere else, And by the way, the one that is downstairs, which is probably most proximate to the time, has it over here. So I settled on it as that.
Flipped.
Yes, the photograph down there is flipped.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that's probably what's confusing. The photograph is
But
flipped.
your question is exactly the questions we kept asking.
Right.
And I remember the long discussion we had about whether we could include it, would it have been there, and so it's right.
Patty Hershey was here. My pal Patty was standing here.
The
all
mummy.
through the time I came to that.
The mummy.
The mummy, yeah, Patty. Patty said,
He used to talk
here,
to us.
and there's the case over there inside.
John, you were going to say something.
Say something about the karma of it when you talk about Crawford Law or Wells or all the other, because that was a feature when we were in the midst of.
Oh, absolutely.
Doing it.
But you say it, because I think that is almost more your expertise than ours.
So there was a great deal of controversy that eventually went up to the U.S. Congress about who owned the invention and the patent rights for this. And as we've already mentioned, it persists to this day. And we decided that we weren't going to get into any of that argument about who invented which in what order. But this was simply, not so simply as you've heard, going to be a portrayal of what happened on that day in this room, and that was uncontestable.
Yes, and the four of us, and Ann Prestopino, we would talk about this. We would say, this is our job. The rest, let history take
It's fine.
care of
I read everything. I read everything, all the Morton's book, all the most big, giant, I hate Morton. There's a title. What was it? The Tarnished Hero. Right? The Tarnished Hero. Tarnished Idol. You know, it should have been Idol Morton. And I read all of that stuff. And Morton made a big tome explaining himself. An interesting fact about Morton that's not known too much is that, so when he was trying to get money from, he gave up his rights of any revenue from this. He couldn't license he tried licensing the use of the inhaler. That didn't work out. It was just too darn easy to just do something a little different than what it was. So he had no way to monetize this thing. He was desperate to monetize it. He had been making $10,000 a year as a dentist in 1846. That's like $2-3 million at least a year. And now he had painless tooth extraction. He was looking to be one of the wealthiest men in the world, probably, if he could franchise that out, etc. But when he did this, being pushed by Bigelow, he lost all his financial leverage. So what he decided was that he wanted to get Congress to award him a certain sum of money for the benefit of mankind, this invention, the benefit of mankind. And that was something that they had done. So he went down there and he set up in the lobby of the Wilbur Theater and started serving hors d'oeuvres. I'm sorry, that's it.
Yeah.
Is it Willard or Wilbur?
I think it's Willard.
It's still there. Wilbur? Is it?
Willard.
Anyway, it's right there on Pennsylvania Avenue, I think. And Willard. He set up in the lobby of the Willard and, set up hors d'oeuvres and drinks and had invited the senators over. And this became a habit when you wanted to influence senators, and it was known as lobbying. And Morton invented lobbying in order to try to get his reward for this invention.
Yes.
Yeah, talking about Morton, how did you decide on the spatial expression and his body position?
So some of this comes from the actor. That's why it's great to have everybody involved. Warren was the actor for Morton. Warren had such a good, firm grip on what happened and a feeling for the man. And so, and an understanding of...
We were so happy when we realized, Patty, Ellie, Warren, and I, that Warren worked. Because
his forehead was
talk
right.
about
Much
Warren
nothing else was,
Buffett.
but his forehead was great. The
Yeah.
forehead was just right. I could use the forehead, I'd have to change everything else. But there was something about having the chief of anesthesia pose for Morton that was
Wait, he wants to-
special fun.
No, he looks, yes, concentrated, but at the same time, very secure of what he's doing, or perhaps has a facade,
Yes.
pretending that...
Yeah.
Remember, he was a real showman.
Yeah.
Exactly.
He was a real showman, and when he was
at that moment, which we call in ways, that was a tipping point in this historic moment. At that point, the group has realized, aha, this is no humbug. It had worked. So if he's ever going to be looking more secure, it's when it becomes evident that he's pulled it off.
And again,
Tell the story you told me this morning about...
oh yes,
Yeah.
I will, but I wanted to say, and again, you see the process of thinking come to the decisions that show that painting. Yes, no, I was going over Julie Fenster's book yesterday just to sort of refresh my memory and think in depth about this talk, or this conversation, it's not a talk, but this conversation that we're all having. And something that I hadn't realized was, and Warren, you may know this, and John, but Morton's wife spent the day at home worried that he was either going to be arrested for murder or successful. And when he came home and he said he was successful, he was extraordinarily sad. She couldn't understand. He was
Depressed,
sad
slumped.
and depressed, and she
No
said, I never
victory.
understood his reaction.
I personally think he realized that his whole chance to monetize it just went out the window. The whole reason he had invented it was to, make this mega dentistry practice of some sort, and it just, that was wonderful, but I just lost everything. Now what am I going to do?
He couldn't sell lithium.
He couldn't know that.
He tried to cover ether's stench
Yeah.
with oil of orange.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
oil of orange. That's why it's tinted.
Yeah.
And it just didn't work. As soon as you go into a hospital, you smell the ether.
Yeah.
And everybody did.
Yeah, they knew it was ether. They didn't know what else was in there besides ether, right? And he was making up that there was other ingredients in his magic potion. He was one of those guys.
So we see the big.
So we have to
Yeah,
stop
we have
it.
to
I want to say something about why this is an iconic. It was an iconic moment for the hospital. But in that portrait represents what this hospital and an academic medical center is. In that portrait, you see all at once our missions, the missions of the hospital. And I think at the end of Hub Week and of innovation and what happens in Boston, that characterizes it. There is in that portrait a demonstration of clinical services. There is in that portrait a demonstration of research and innovation. There is in that portrait a demonstration of teaching, which is what this institution does. And what came out of that moment was what we do as well, which is community, to the immediate community of Boston and also the community of the globe. And that's what happened this day and is characterized in that moment. And you guys for bringing it to life. Thank you.
John.
Thank you.